Today we're going to look at a few tips in order to have a smooth workflow in Maya, especially when working with animation and physics and simulation. Your scene can start to get very heavy and your computer may crash if you're trying to make Maya do very intense calculations. And since we're advancing now into more complex procedures, it's important to remember to have a very structured workflow in Maya. So we're going to go back and review a few tips to make sure that you're having a correct workflow before you start doing any physics simulations or working with particles and such. So this is the scene I'm going to work with to show you some of these tips. And if you look at my scene, what I have is, first of all, I have a sky dome light, which is this sphere. And I've added a color ramp to it. So that's why I have a colored gradient. And in order to do this, under my sky dome light, I added here a ramp. So if you would like to learn how to do this, all you have to do is go to your sky dome light, create a sky dome light. I'm going to hide this one so you can see the process from zero. And I've added here, instead of adding a file, I've added a ramp. And then you can choose between a diagonal ramp or a circular ramp, and you can also change the colors of your ramp by selecting each point and then switching your colors. And you can also add intervals and add even more colors to your ramp. So this gives you an idea of how I made my sky dome light quickly. I'm going to delete this one because I already had one existing sky dome light. And then other than this, I have my landscape, which is just a polyplane that I've used soft select to kind of pull up some of it so that it's more like a landscape that has some hills on it. And then I've just modeled some small kind of mushrooms. And if I select these, you'll see that I have two sets in each one. So if I open this, I have a high resolution mushroom. You can see here I have many subdivisions in it. And then I have a lower resolution mushroom. And so this is one of the tips that I want to show you, because when working with things such as physics, if you want to make Maya calculate physics over a high resolution mesh, it will be much more intensive for your computer to do these calculations because of all the subdivisions and details in your mesh. So it's always good to actually have a duplicate of your mushroom and have one that's very low resolution with very little detail, and then one with higher resolution. So we'll go into this again, but I just want you to know that this is what I have in my scene, and this is what I'll be working with when I want to add physics. And then here I just experimented and I wanted to make something like a very abstract kind of tree form. And so this is the other element in my scene. And so now that I've showed you every component in my scene, I want to go through some very basic steps before we start to animate. And the first one is deleting history. So we've gone over this, but it's really important to delete history of your 3D models, especially when you're done with the shape that you want to have and you know that you won't be adding any more detail to your model. Before animating it, there's so many steps that went into it that it's good for Maya to just delete all these steps and forget them and just interpret this as your final shape. So under my attribute editor here, if I start clicking on the arrow, you'll see all the tabs that have gone through for that specific shape. So if you see, there's so many information in these tabs that it'll be really labor intensive for Maya to want to animate this, taking all of these steps into account. So again, deleting history is really important. And to do that, you just select your objects and you go to Edit, Delete by Type, and you delete your history. And so this should kind of delete all of the steps that are not needed anymore in that shape. So you can see my tabs now are much smaller. The other thing that's really important is to increment and save. What do I mean by this? Is that every time we finish a complex procedure in our file, we should always go to File and Increment and Save. What this will do is that it'll make a new file of your scene. So if my first scene was called just mushroom, my second scene now that I've done increment and save is called mushroom.0001. And so this is really important because if for some reason Maya crashes, you won't have to model everything from scratch, right? You have now this last step that you did, which was delete history. And so if for some reason Maya crashes, you'll be able to open up your last step. So every time you do something that's very labor intensive, just remember to save your scene as a new file or increment and save. And that way you'll have a record of all the different steps you went through when creating your scene. So I've deleted the history for this very complex object. I'm going to go ahead and delete the history for everything else too, because I know that I don't need to have it for now. So for my polyplane, for example, I can also go to Edit and delete my history.